Hi, this is Tiffany Martin with Medical Microbiology, and we are working our way through Chapter 5. We've done a lot of introduction. We learned about oxidation and reduction. We learned about enzymes, and now here we are at the nitty-gritty. We need to learn about cellular respiration. What happens? Organisms need to take in nutrients. They break them down and then use that to make energy, which they can then use that energy to use those broken down molecules, those smaller molecules, to build larger molecules. And that's the whole process of metabolism and what we need to do, breaking things down and building things up. So we need a lot of energy. We need energy. Now, when we say metabolism, right at the very beginning, I think I mentioned that, okay, when you think of metabolism, you think of food or losing weight or metabolism of a 16-year-old. And that's a large part of it, of what we're doing. We are taking in nutrients to fuel our body. And you'll hear that. Who's my fitness people? When you work out, they'll say that you need to eat a meal that fuels your workout, right? But it's not so simple. You can't just take a banana and put it on your arm and do arm day and expect, that to fuel your workout. You've got to be able to internalize it, break it down, make that energy so that you can build muscle and build the things you need. Okay, so if we do not make energy, bad things happen. It's not that we don't feel tired. The energy that our cells use, the currency of energy that our cells use is ATP. It's adenosine triphosphate, and that's a good molecule, contains a lot of energy. When you break the phosphates off of this molecule, it generates a lot of energy, and that's great. But we have to be able to utilize it and produce it. If our body can't make ATP, then it's not that we just feel tired. If we completely stop making ATP, we will die, and we will die immediately. We need that energy to do things like breathing in and out. That requires energy. And so when that process stops, it becomes a serious problem. All right, so metabolism is a very old set of pathways. We're talking about microbial metabolism in this class, but it is very similar to human metabolism. So things we're learning about cellular respiration in this process you'll be able to take in other courses. Okay, so any of you guys some of you told me that you like those murder crime shows. You know how they start at the end and they show you like a dark alley and a dead body, and then you see this, but you don't know what happened, and then they back up and tell you how you got there, and it's to like get your interest and figure out where you're going so that it makes more sense as you're going along the journey. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to start at the very end of cellular respiration, of breaking down nutrients to make ATP, breaking down glucose to make ATP. So at the very end, we want to see how that ATP is actually made. So that's where we're starting. All right, the most common ATP making process is chemiosmosis. You can practice saying that one, that's a harder one. Chemiosmosis, we do it, most bacteria do it, yeast do it, plants do it. A lot of organisms make ATP by this process. So let's look at this process, and I'm going to pause the video, and I just want you to write down a few observations. What if you just saw this diagram, what could you say, again, given your prior knowledge in biology courses, what could you say about this diagram? Okay, so things I hope you noticed was these circles and tails mean a phospholipid bilayer. This is a membrane, a cell membrane here. So that's kind of the science abbreviation for those hydrophobic tails, the hydrophilic heads. The tails go together away from the water. This is inside the cell. This is outside the cell. What's going on? So immediately you notice that there's a phospholipid bilayer. So the process of chemiosmosis has to occur in a membrane. You may have noticed these kind of they're proteins, these kind of circles going through. It kind of makes a channel through these membranes. These are integral proteins within the membrane, and they make a channel. They allow things to pass from one side of the cell to the inside, from the inside of the cell to the outside of the cell. In this case, we notice a lot of H's. H stands for hydrogen. This H has a plus, so you know it is a hydrogen ion. Hydrogen, one proton, one electron. If it has a positive charge, what's it missing? it's missing, and it's electron. It has a proton, but it doesn't have an electron. So there's lots of these hydrogens there. There's a lot of them here. There's a few of them inside the cell. We see the hydrogens are moving in and out of the cell. What do you notice about concentration? Did anybody write down anything about that? There are more hydrogen ions outside of the cell than inside of the cell. Now, knowing what we know about things that pass through, things want to come to equilibrium. You want to have equal amounts. If things can pass through something freely, and there are these holes here, so if they can pass through freely, you're going to want the same amount on each side. The cell wants to come to equilibrium. It wants the same amount of hydrogens on the outside as it is on the inside, and that's not what we see. So these arrows are telling you that these hydrogens are going this direction. Does this hydrogen want to go this direction? Well, there's a lot over here and there's not much over here, so there's no reason. Equilibrium actually says these hydrogens want to come back in. So this process, the coming back in, happens freely, but this process, pushing them out, is going to require some energy. And that's what that squiggly arrow is saying, that there's going to be energy. We'll come back, figure out where this energy comes from, but know that it's going to take some pushing, some pumping to get these hydrogen ions on the outside of the cell. Now, once they're outside, they desperately want to come back inside. They want to reach equilibrium. This is the cell membrane. They don't go very far. They stay right around the cell membrane. Now, because of the charge, they can't just go right through the membrane. They need to find a passageway or a channel. So as soon as they find one where they can go through, they will do that. So in this case, these are some integral proteins that are forming a channel, and these hydrogen ions are coming through. Nobody has to push them. We don't need any energy involved. They will come back through until they reach equilibrium, until the same amount are on the outside as the inside. So they are flowing freely through that. And we can go ahead and call these passageways something. The one where we have to add energy is called a proton. That's from that hydrogen proton. Proton pump, because we're pumping them out. The one where they're freely passing back through is called a proton channel. So a channel of water, it'll go just down there, it flows freely. Okay, what else did you notice? Hopefully you noticed ATP. That's our end result, right? We're trying to make ATP. This is showing us how we make ATP. We're putting ADP and we're adding a phosphate group and creating adenosine triphosphate. So adenosine diphosphate plus another phosphate gives us adenosine triphosphate. All right, so that happens here. And to build things together, to assemble anabolism, to make those reactions happen, we've already learned that they need an enzyme. So these black circles here are actually our enzyme. It needs to end in ACE, and it's usually named after what they do. So in this case, the name of this enzyme is ATP synthase, because it's synthesizing ATP. So this enzyme is hanging out right here. It actually gets attached to this proton channel. And as these hydrogen ions come through, that generates some energy of its own. Now, the energy that we're talking about here is not chemical energy. It's talking about energy based on location. I want you to think about a dam at the top of okay, so let's think about a mountain and think about a lake at the top of the mountain, and the lake is held back by a dam. So I've got all this water at the top of the mountain and it's held back by a dam. Now, if I open the dam, what's going to happen to the water? It's going to flow down the mountain. This water is going to flow based on location. It's going to flow down. Now, as it's moving down the mountain, if I were to put a water wheel in its way and that water came through and it moved the water wheel, we can generate electricity. And that's what we do here. We generate electricity for that. So this is a type of energy that is based on physical energy and location. And so the water at the top of the dam in the lake has potential energy. There's no energy yet, but because it's location high on the mountain, and because we can take that water and let it go down, it has potential energy. When the water starts flowing, we get energy of movement, and that's kinetic energy. And that can do things. It can move the water wheel, which will power and make electricity, Or let's go back to our cells and use that same process. We have all of our hydrogens up here, which is a reservoir of potential energy because they want to flow through this. There's our enzyme. That kinetic energy is enough to put these two things together. Adenosine diphosphate plus a phosphate group to get ATP, adenosine triphosphate. Okay, so we just made ATP. We can live. That's exciting. So that is very good. All right, so let's do fill in your blank. I'm going to give you a minute and see how well you did, and then we'll go back through and you can check yourself. Okay, it needs a membrane. In a prokaryotic cell, it uses the cell membrane. In a eukaryotic cell, it'll use the mitochondria, and particularly the cristae, the inner folds in the mitochondria. So hopefully you've learned that in eukaryotic classes, other classes where you can put that down. It also makes ATP in chloroplasts. So that happens as well in the thylakoid, the inner membrane of that. So we are going to take the energy, and that energy is going to come from glucose. Remember, we're powering our workout. We're eating good foods. If we're a plant, it would come from sunlight. But that's going to power that proton pump, which is that integral protein, and it forms a passageway through the membrane. Proton pump pumps the protons across. We're setting up a concentration gradient because there's not very many inside, there's a lot more outside, and we're continuing to pump them out. So this requires energy to do that, and this is called active transport, which we kind of reviewed briefly in chapter 3. The result is this is that concentration gradient with more hydrogens on one side and less hydrogens on the inside. And this hydrogen gradient represents that reservoir of hydrogens is that potential energy. Okay, what else? Concentrated protons have a tendency to spread out, but the membrane is impermeable to hydrogens except at certain locations. These passageways are called those proton channels. When the protons that were actively pumped to one side can only be diffused back down to the other, and then they go through these proton channels. This is an example of facilitated diffusion. Okay, so diffusion means it comes back through without any energy. Facilitated means it can't just cross through the membrane. It needs those integral proteins to form a channel. We said that movement is kinetic energy. At the end of the proton channels is an enzyme called ATP synthase, and that will allow a phosphate to join up with ADP. We're going to phosphorylate adenosine diphosphate to make adenosine triphosphate. Okay, how'd you do? Did you get it? This is a tough section. Review what you need, skim through what you need to get all the information, and I'll see you in the next video.